They said, "You'll love the shed. It has string lights now." That's the sentence I heard while still wearing the hospital wristband, the one with my name slightly smudged from 3 weeks of sponge baths and bruised IV sites. My son said it with a half smile, like he was announcing some clever surprise, like a child showing off a drawing that doesn't quite look human. And I, still dizzy from painkillers and the unfamiliar slope of their new front steps, tried to laugh. Not because it was funny, because no one had made room for silence. I'd just come from the rehabilitation clinic where I'd relearned how to walk without falling over, how to use a spoon again with my right hand, how to stand up without calling a nurse. I thought I was coming home. Instead, I arrived to a reclaimed wine bar where my bedroom used to be. I'm 82. I don't have many illusions left. I live in the body of a woman who has done most of her labor invisibly, making soups no one remembers, folding towels with perfect corners, sending birthday cards with $10 bills I couldn't always afford. I raised a son who used to cry when his shoelaces came undone, who once begged me not to leave him at preschool. Now he can't look me in the eye when I ask where my dresser is. "We thought you'd appreciate some privacy," he said, motioning toward the garden. As if I were an Airbnb guest. As if my decades in that room had no weight. My daughter-in-law added, "The light out there is actually really lovely, especially at dusk." She meant the shed. They meant the shed. I stood in the hallway on swollen legs, looking past the island of curated granite countertops and open shelving where my cookie jars used to be. The house had changed. Or perhaps it was finally honest. There were no signs I'd ever lived there. No photo of me on the walls, no slippers by the heater, no crossword book in the armchair. My coat, the one I'd worn to all their winter recitals, was nowhere in the closet. Someone had put it in a bin in the garage. "We needed to declutter," Lisa had said breezily, waving a hand with nails painted the color of wet cement. They gave me a tour, as if I were a guest. "This is where we entertain now," my son said, gesturing toward the corner of the living room that used to be my reading nook. In its place stood a bar made of salvaged wood, with brass wine racks and hanging glasses that trembled when you shut the back door. Where my bed once was, there were stools. A neon sign buzzed softly. "Sip happens." I stared at it for a long time. That room had once held my mother's cedar chest. My father's war medals were in that chest. I don't know where they are now. "We wanted to surprise you," Lisa said. Her voice carried that strange pitch she used around me, cheerful and defensive, as if smiling could cancel cruelty. I didn't ask what they did with my quilt. I didn't ask where they put my sewing basket, or the shadow box of pressed flowers I'd made the summer Daniel was born. I simply nodded, holding on to the rolling suitcase I'd brought from the hospital, the one with the broken zipper and a ribbon tied to the handle like a wartime tag. That suitcase had followed me through 3 homes, 2 surgeries, and now, apparently, into exile. Out back, the shed had been swept. I'll give them that. The floor was bare, the windows cracked but clean. A cot stood against the wall, covered in a fitted sheet that didn't match the pillowcase. There was a battery-powered lantern on the stool beside it, and a space heater that looked older than I was. There were string lights along the ceiling beams, tiny fairy lights, the kind you see in wedding magazines and teenage Pinterest boards. "We thought you'd like the ambiance," Daniel said. The word made me wince. Ambiance. They'd turned my life into a mood board. "It's just for a little while," he added. "We're working on a long-term plan." But his voice trailed off before I could ask what long-term meant. That night, I sat on the cot in my winter coat, waiting for the heater to click on. It made a low groaning sound, like a tired man settling into bed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took out my toothbrush and medicine, lined them on the windowsill, and unzipped my bag. I could hear laughter from the house, wine glasses clinking, music. Someone had friends over. Lisa's voice carried across the yard. It's such a fun space now. We can finally entertain properly. I remember folding my hands in my lap and noticing that my thumbs were trembling. I wasn't cold. Not exactly. I was displaced. You can be warm and still feel forgotten. The next morning, Lisa brought me coffee in a paper cup. I wasn't sure how you like it anymore, she said, already turning to leave. It was black. I haven't drunk black coffee since 1978, but I nodded and thanked her. She didn't ask if I'd slept well. No one did. Around noon, Daniel came out and stood in the doorway. We're going to the farmer's market, he said. Do you want anything? I said no. He didn't ask again. After they left, I walked slowly to the back of the garden, where the rose bush used to be. It had been dug up. In its place was a raised planter box labelled herbs. I stood there a long time. The sun was out. The birds were chirping. And somewhere in the kitchen, my son's guests were drinking Sauvignon Blanc where my bed used to be. I had lived in that house for 19 years. I paid for the roof when it leaked. I paid for the dishwasher. I paid for the damn shed. The idea that I was now a guest, no, an intrusion, was not an accident. It was a decision. It was the quiet, polite exile that happens not in courtrooms or with screaming matches, but with string lights and folded blankets and phrases like, "We thought it would be more comfortable." They hadn't evicted me. They'd curated my absence, sanitized it. I didn't say any of this. I smiled when they brought me soup in a compostable bowl. I said thank you when they offered me a fleece throw. I nodded when Lisa said, "We're just trying to do what's best for everyone." I have always nodded. I nodded through my husband's funeral. I nodded when my pension was used to renovate the kitchen. I nodded when they said it would be better for me to stay somewhere safe after the fall. But something inside me had stopped nodding. Quietly, firmly, somewhere in the small place between breath and shame. That night, I wrote my name on the inside of my suitcase with a Sharpie. Not because I was afraid it would be lost, but because I wanted to see it somewhere. My name. Still mine. Still here. The realization didn't come like thunder. It came slowly, like a faucet left running in another room. It started with a single sentence I overheard through the cracked window of the shed. Lisa was talking on the phone, probably to her sister or her friend, who always sounded like she was chewing something sticky. "Honestly," Lisa said, her voice light and amused, "she's actually fine in the shed. It's more than enough space for someone her age. We even gave her a little lamp." A little lamp. As if I were a hamster. As if the light of a low-wattage bulb could excuse the fact that they'd moved me out of the house I helped them buy. I didn't feel sad then. I felt something colder than that. Clarity. A kind of cold breath down the back of the neck that makes you sit very still. Because you finally see it. You see what they think of you. And you see that they no longer need to lie about it. Not even behind your back. Because they assume you're not really listening. That night, I lay on the cot, eyes open in the dark, counting the seconds between the groans of the heater. It had a rhythm to it, like a distant machine trying to breathe. I imagined my bedroom, my real bedroom, just 30 feet away, full of warm air and quiet things that once belonged to me. But I didn't feel drawn to it anymore. Not because it wasn't mine, because I realized it never really had been, not in their eyes. The bed had been mine, the dresser, the little bowl where I kept spare buttons. But the room, the space, that had always been conditional. Conditional on my usefulness, conditional on my silence, conditional on their convenience. The next day, I asked Daniel directly, "Where are my things?" I said it plainly, without accusation. He didn't like that. He shifted, avoided my eyes. "We had to put some of it in storage," he said. "Some of it was donated. We figured you wouldn't want to deal with all that clutter." Clutter. That word stuck in my throat like a bone. My photo albums, my wedding china, my journals, my winter coats, my sewing machine. These were now clutter. He was trying to be gentle, I suppose, but the lie was too shallow to stand on. "You donated my life," I said, not as a question. He said nothing. Lisa, ever the diplomat, chimed in with her usual strategy, smiling while dismissing. "We kept the essentials," she said. "Really, we were trying to make it easier for you, less to worry about. Simplicity is freedom." That phrase. I'd read it once in a magazine, over an article about minimalist closets and green smoothies. It sounded clean. It sounded modern. But it wasn't true. Not when what you were simplifying was a person. Not when what you were throwing away was their proof of having lived. Later that afternoon, when they were out, at brunch, I think, or some farmer's market where they pretended to care about vegetables, I quietly opened the side gate and walked to the garage. I'd seen Daniel key in the code once. He'd never imagined I was watching. They always assume you stop noticing at a certain age, like your eyes give up. I remembered the code. I typed it slowly. The door creaked open, and there it was, a row of bins, all grey, all labelled in Lisa's square handwriting. Holiday decor. Old paperwork. Guest linens. Nothing with my name. I searched the back. Behind an old stroller and a bike with a flat tire, I saw a box marked MISC. I knew that handwriting. It was Daniel's. From before, he learned how to shape his letters to impress others. I opened it. Inside were fragments. My old recipe cards, some curled at the corners from decades of handling. The scarf my sister knitted me before she died. The broken frame that used to hold our family picture from 1983. The one where Daniel is missing his front tooth, and I'm holding the dog who used to hide in the laundry basket. At the bottom was my little wooden jewellery box. I opened it. My mother's brooch was gone. So was the silver locket Derek gave me for our 25th anniversary. In their place, a note, tarnished, donated. I stared at that note for a long time, the way you stare at a puddle after someone drives through it and soaks your clothes. You don't move, you just feel it, all the way through. I took the recipe cards. I didn't say anything. I put the box back, locked the garage, walked slowly across the yard to the shed and sat on the cot. The string lights buzzed softly overhead. It was early evening, and the sky was bruising. A soft purple, like someone had held their breath too long. I held the cards in my lap like prayer books, each one written in my own handwriting, the loops and swirls of a woman who used to make things from scratch, who used to matter. I realized then, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to realize before, that they had planned this, not the details, but the outcome. They had imagined a life without me in the house, and they'd made it happen, quietly, tastefully, efficiently. I had been moved out like an old love seat, and they expected me to say thank you for the ambiance. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in years. Grief lives elsewhere in me now. It's not loud, it's a posture. It's the way my shoulders curve when no one's looking. It's the way I hold a cup too tightly, or the way I whisper, "Thank you," even when I've been insulted. That night, I wrote a letter to myself. Not a journal entry, not a list, just one line. They did not forget me. They removed me. There's a difference. Forgetting is an accident. This was deliberate. A clearing of space, a curating of silence. I folded the paper and put it under the cot, just next to the recipe cards, a small archive of what had really happened. The next morning, Daniel brought me toast. "We're thinking of converting the shed," he said, handing me the plate like a waiter who's already moved on. "Insulate it properly, maybe add a little kitchenette, make it more livable." I nodded slowly. "For who?" I asked. He blinked. "For you, of course," he said. But his voice faltered just enough, because we both knew he didn't mean for me. He meant for their comfort, for their peace of mind, for the narrative they could tell others that they had provided for me, given me a charming little cottage space, a she-shed with fairy lights and freedom. He didn't see that every gesture had already spoken louder than any blueprint. After he left, I took out my old phone, the one I hadn't used in weeks. I turned it on. The battery blinked red, but it still worked. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the one I never deleted. Gordon and Jameson Legal Services. Derek and I had used them once, years ago, when refinancing. I called. A woman picked up. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to ask a few questions about property co-ownership and occupancy rights." My voice was steady. I used to tremble when talking to strangers, especially about money or legal things. But not that day. That day, my voice had steel in it. That day, I remembered I wasn't just a guest in my own life. She asked a few questions. I answered plainly. Yes, I co-signed on the mortgage. No, I was never removed. Yes, I have proof. Yes, I'm currently residing in a structure not zoned for living. There was a pause. Then she said something that made me sit down. "Ma'am, you have standing. Significant standing." I wrote the phrase down on the back of the toast napkin. Significant standing. It tasted like something close to justice. That evening, when Lisa brought me a salad with chickpeas and called it power greens, I smiled. I thanked her, and when she turned to go, I asked, "What did you do with Derek's medals?" She turned slowly. Her smile froze for just a moment. "We packed everything carefully," she said. "Everything is safe." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Because I'll be asking for a full inventory soon." She didn't respond, just walked back toward the house a little faster than usual. I watched her go, then reached under the cot and pulled out the folded letter, the recipe cards, and the napkin. I lined them on the windowsill like holy objects. My truth, my proof, and my plan. I wasn't angry. I was awake. They didn't ask why I'd started wearing my shoes inside the shed, even to sleep. They didn't ask why the little mirror on the wall had been taken down, or why the blanket they gave me now sat folded on the cot like a guest towel no one ever intended to use. Maybe they noticed, but chose not to speak. More likely, they didn't notice at all. That's how it happens. The quiet descent. Not through shouting matches or slammed doors, but through 100 unnoticed details that accumulate like dust on an unused shelf. By the end of the second week, I knew the pattern of their footsteps across the deck. I knew which nights they had wine and which they had friends over. I could tell by the length of laughter, the cadence of ice cubes in glasses, the scent of lemon rinds and burnt rosemary that drifted faintly through the air vent above the shed window. I knew which days Lisa worked from home. Those were the days I didn't see her at all, just heard her voice through the open kitchen window, rehearsing her phrases on conference calls, describing herself as emotionally intelligent and team-oriented. No one ever came to check on the heater after I mentioned it sputtered. They told me to unplug it and let it rest, like it was an old dog. The days blurred in that peculiar way that only happens when you're being gently excluded, when you're physically present, but emotionally omitted. Lisa stopped bringing me coffee. Instead, she left it in a thermal carafe on a tray outside the shed door, like room service in a motel with no name. At first, I tried to tell myself it was kindness, an attempt at autonomy. But no one asks what you prefer when they're being kind. No one removes the chair from under you and calls it empowerment. I began walking during the afternoons. Not far, my hip wouldn't let me, but enough to trace the edges of the neighborhood and mark where I ended. I wasn't introduced to the neighbors. They waved politely, that gentle, guarded smile people give older women who look like they might ask for directions or salvation. One woman, watering her hydrangeas, asked if I was new to the area. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know what to say. I wasn't new. I wasn't visiting. I was displaced. I said, "I'm staying with family," and she nodded with relief, as if I had passed some unspoken test. After that, I kept my walks shorter. The world outside the gate was not unkind, but it had no place for unnamed women with lined faces and sensible shoes. The mail stopped coming to the shed. I used to receive the occasional catalogue or health insurance form. Then nothing. I asked Daniel once, gently, and he said, "We're digitizing everything now. Less clutter." That word again. Clutter. I imagined my existence reduced to a checkbox on a spreadsheet. Other, inactive, irrelevant. I started keeping notes in the margins of a gardening calendar I found in the shed's bottom drawer. Notes about what was missing, what had been moved, what they stopped saying. I wrote in pen because pencil felt too erasable. One day, I wrote, "They don't speak in full sentences around me anymore, only suggestions and conclusions." They told people I was resting, recovering, transitioning back into routine. As if I were a new appliance being calibrated, not a human woman who once taught Daniel to tie his shoes, who once stayed up until 3 a.m., sewing his Halloween costume when he decided, at 7, that he wanted to be a train conductor. I didn't speak of those things. Nostalgia is dangerous in the hands of the ignored. It becomes either a performance or a liability. I kept quiet. One morning, I heard Daniel on the phone in the kitchen. The window was open, and the breeze carried his voice. "It's going better than expected," he said. "She's low maintenance. Honestly, the shed is probably the best thing we could have done." He chuckled. "Yeah, I mean, it's not like she was using the house before." He paused. No legal issues. We've got power of attorney. Well, sort of. It's informal, but she's not the type to fight it." He was wrong. I may not have fought before, but it wasn't because I couldn't. It was because I believed, deeply and foolishly, that love should never require a contract to be respected. That day, I called my former neighbour from our old street, Margie, the one who worked part-time at the public records office. We hadn't spoken in years, but she still remembered my voice. I asked her if she could check something for me. "Of course," she said, and I could hear the curiosity rising in her throat. "Are you okay?" she added, just before hanging up. I didn't answer. The documents arrived 3 days later, in an envelope marked personal and confidential. Daniel didn't see it. I had it sent to the P.O. box I still paid for from the days I used to run church newsletters. Inside were the original property records and a notarized letter indicating I still held 48% equity in the home. Not enough to seize the house, but enough to remind them I wasn't furniture. That night, I sat by the tiny shed window and watched as Lisa refilled the wine bar inside what used to be my bedroom. I could see the glow of the neon sign reflecting off the mirror. Sip happens. I watched her open a new bottle, something with a French label, and pour 2 glasses. Daniel came into view. They clinked. They laughed. He said something I couldn't hear, but she laughed so hard she wiped her eyes. It was a beautiful laugh, and I thought, this is what they wanted. Ease, unburdened living, evenings without guilt. And I was the thing that made guilt necessary. They didn't remove me to be cruel. They removed me to be comfortable. There's a difference. It's just that one of them still leaves you cold. When the rain came later that week, it seeped through the corner of the shed where the gutter didn't drain. I placed a towel there and watched the slow spread of damp across the wood floor. No one checked on me. They assumed I'd speak up if something was wrong. But I was past warning them. I was observing, taking notes, every creak, every oversight, every silence. They weren't evidence for confrontation. They were coordinates. I was charting my departure. Lisa began referring to me in third person even when I was in the room. "She's fine," she told a friend on speakerphone. "She doesn't need much." She offered me gluten-free crackers with hummus and called it lunch. Daniel stopped hugging me altogether. He used to kiss my cheek. Now he nodded, like I was a colleague who had overstayed a meeting. And still, I said thank you. Until one evening, while refolding the same blanket for the 5th time, I realized I wasn't trying to keep warm. I was trying to keep place. I wanted the blanket folded, the cot made, the dishes washed and placed upside down to dry. Not because it mattered to them, because it mattered to me. Because order, even in a space you didn't choose, is the last domain of the displaced. They may give you no room in their lives, but they can't take your care. They can't take your rituals. So I kept them, quietly, deliberately. Every night I brushed my hair 70 times before sleep. Every morning I folded my nightgown and placed it beneath my pillow. Every afternoon I made tea, even if the water came from a plug-in kettle with a frayed cord. These were my ceremonies, not of survival, of identity. And through it all, I listened. I listened to the walls of the house I helped finance, to the laughter in the room where I once taught Daniel to read, to the humming refrigerator that used to store my apple pie and now held oat milk and vegan mayo. I listened to the space where I was no longer welcome. But more importantly, I began to listen to myself. And I began to hear something I hadn't heard in years. Resolve. The shift didn't arrive with a bang. It came quietly, disguised as something mundane. I was in the shed, organizing the little stack of magazines Lisa had once brought out as a gesture, though I doubted she had ever read them herself. Publications with glossy covers and headlines about 10-minute yoga routines and seasonal decor. One of them slipped off the cot and fell open, and tucked between the pages was something I hadn't seen in years. A photograph. It was Daniel, about 6 years old, crouching in the backyard, holding up a jar with a firefly inside. His hair was too long, his shirt inside out. And I could still remember the sound of his voice that evening, saying, "Look, Mum, I caught light. That photograph hadn't been staged or filtered. It was messy and real and full of something I hadn't seen in this house for a long time: recognition. I stared at it for a long time. And then I stood up, walked to the tiny drawer where I kept my tin box of what's left: the recipe cards, the letter to myself, the folded napkin with the lawyer's name. I added the photo to the pile, not because I was nostalgic, but because it was evidence, not of my usefulness, but of my existence. That was the day I began writing things down with intent, not just observations, but statements. I wrote my full name at the top of a page: Martha Lillian Harlow. I underlined it. Then I listed every item I had paid for in the house. I had receipts for some, memory for others: the roof repairs after the hailstorm, the down payment, which I'd funded entirely from Derek's life insurance, the new oven that Lisa had insisted was essential for entertaining. I made a list of the birthdays I'd covered when Daniel was between jobs, the months I had paid their utilities without fanfare. I wrote them all down, not because I expected repayment, but because I wanted a record, a testament. Somewhere beyond this string-lit exile, there had to be a version of my story not told in sighs and footnotes. That afternoon, I dressed myself in the coat I'd kept hanging by the shed door, my old navy one with the buttons missing, and walked to the corner library 2 blocks down. The walk was slow. My hip complained the whole way, but I didn't stop. Inside, the air was thick with dust and possibility. I asked for the public computer terminal. The girl behind the desk was young, with dark eyeliner and chipped black nail polish. "You need help logging in?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "I was using a keyboard before you were born." She smiled and handed me a time card. I searched for rental listings: low-income housing, shared flats, studios for seniors. Most were full. Some had wait lists. A few were too far or too expensive. But I wasn't discouraged. This was the beginning, not the solution. I printed out 3 pages, circled 2 numbers. When I got back to the shed, Daniel was in the yard, watering Lisa's herb garden. "You went out?" he said, surprised. "Yes," I replied. "I like the air." He nodded slowly. "Just let us know next time." Lisa was worried. "She didn't knock," I said, and walked past him. That night, I lay awake and rehearsed a sentence in my mind. I am not staying. Not out of spite. Not out of drama. Out of recognition. I had spent too many years hoping for people to notice me, to remember me, to include me. And now I saw the truth. I could not wait to be chosen. I had to choose myself. The next day, I called one of the numbers. A woman named Marlene answered. "It's a shared house," she said. "I don't do drama. No men, no dogs, no loud music, rents weekly, cash only. You clean up after yourself?" "Religiously," I said. "You cook?" "Old-fashioned, nothing fancy." "Good." "You eat frozen dinners. Your smell's going to ruin the kitchen. You want to come look?" "Yes," I said. "Today." She gave me the address. I hung up and opened the drawer. I took out the cash I'd saved from years of careful pinching, the envelope I'd tucked inside my undergarments drawer since Derek passed. I didn't know exactly how much was there. I hadn't dared count until now. I opened it. $847. That evening I told Daniel I might go stay with a friend for a while. His face shifted, not alarm, discomfort. That's sudden," he said. "Are you upset about something?" I looked at him for a long moment. Are you asking because you're curious, or because you're afraid I'll say yes? He didn't answer. He didn't deny it either. I left 2 days later. I packed my things at dawn, what little I had. My coat, my wallet, my folder of documents, the tin box, the photo of Daniel catching light. I left behind the heater, the fleece blanket, the unopened box of protein bars Lisa had gifted me. On the way out, I stuck a note to the inside of the shed door. Don't worry, I'm warm enough now. Marlene's house was old and quiet and smelled faintly of boiled potatoes. The floorboards creaked and the kitchen faucet dripped. But the room was clean, the bed was soft, and the window faced a row of trees that turned golden in the afternoon light. Marlene didn't ask many questions. She simply handed me a spare key and pointed to the bathroom down the hall. Rent's due on Fridays, she said, and don't hog the hot water. That evening, I unpacked. I laid my nightgown on the bed. I put my tin box in the drawer. I brewed tea on a proper stove. No one knocked, no one monitored, no one called. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them, which isn't the same. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. In the morning, I walked to the corner market and bought real bread. I paid in exact change. The cashier smiled and asked if I wanted a receipt. I said yes. I folded it into my wallet. A receipt not just for the bread, but for the beginning. For the moment the shift became real. I was not safe yet, not free, but I had moved. And that movement, quiet and unannounced, felt like revolution. It was 2 weeks after I moved into Marlene's house that the past found me again. Not through phone calls or messages, those I had learned to silence, but in the shape of an envelope that arrived without warning, hand-delivered to the front door with no return address, just my name, written in a familiar, anxious scrawl. I knew the handwriting before I picked it up. My grandson, Kieran, the only one who used to ask about my favourite colour, the only one who once spent an entire afternoon building a birdhouse with me out of scrap wood, painting it red because red means important. I stood there on the front steps with the envelope in my hands, unsure whether to open it inside or out, as if the paper itself might breathe differently depending on the air around it. Eventually, I went to the kitchen, sat at the small table beneath the humming light, and opened it slowly, like I might be unwrapping a bruise. Inside, a single sheet of lined notebook paper. "Grandma," it began. "Where are you? Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you just left. I've been checking the mailbox every day. I miss you. Please let me know you're okay." No guilt. No pressure. Just a boy. No, a young man now. Reaching out with the kind of sincerity that doesn't come often in a family like ours. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number, different area code. His new cell, probably. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't call. Not yet. But something inside me softened. The part that had calcified from months of silence cracked just a little. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, not because I was upset, because I was trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted. 2 mornings later, while pouring tea, Marlene slid a second envelope across the kitchen table, thicker, official, legal. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I opened it with the tip of a butter knife. Inside, a letter from a firm I recognized, only because I'd seen its name embossed on Lisa's old notepads. "We are reaching out on behalf of Adam and Lisa Harlow," it read. "Our clients are concerned for your well-being and wish to initiate a conversation about your current living arrangements and your long-term care. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to avoid further steps. The tone was falsely kind, like a padded cell. The language curled inward on itself, using concern as a leash. My well-being, my care, my current environment. As if I were a lab specimen who had escaped, I folded the letter and placed it next to Kieran's, the contrast so sharp it made my hands tremble. That evening, Marlene and I sat in the living room watching the local news with the volume low. She glanced at the unopened wine bottle on the table and said, "You want a glass?" I nodded. She poured generously and said nothing more, but halfway through the broadcast, as they reported on local housing ordinances, she said without looking at me, "You planning to stay quiet forever?" I took a sip, then said, "I don't know. But I'm not ready to be spoken for again." She nodded. "Just don't wait too long. Time doesn't forgive hesitation." That night, I turned my old phone back on. 43 missed calls, 19 messages. The first ones were frantic, Lisa pleading, Adam demanding. "Where are you, Mom? You can't just leave like that. This is childish. Call us. We're trying to help." The later ones turned sharper. "Fine. Do what you want. You're making this harder than it needs to be." People are asking questions. I listened to every one of them once, then deleted them. Except for one. Kieran. His voice cracked as he said, "I just want to know if you're safe. Please call. You don't have to explain. I just need to hear you." I didn't call that night, but I saved the number. That was the beginning. The next morning, I stood at the corner cafe near Marlene's house and ordered coffee from a young man with kind eyes and tattooed knuckles. As I paid, I asked quietly, "Do you happen to know if this place is hiring?" He looked me over, then smiled. "Always need someone who shows up." 2 days later, I started training. 3 mornings a week, 5 a.m. to 11. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. At the end of the first week, the manager handed me a pay envelope. Small. Thin, but real. Money earned with my own hands, unfiltered by obligation. I didn't tell anyone. I just walked to the bank, cashed it, and bought a new scarf. Navy blue, soft wool, warm. The second legal letter came the following week, this time with more teeth. "We are concerned about reports of cognitive decline," it read. "Please be advised that if you do not respond within 10 business days, we may be forced to consider guardianship measures in order to ensure your safety." That word. Guardianship. The way they used it like a net. Like a cage padded in apologies. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, reading the letter over and over. I could hear Lisa's voice between the lines. It's for her own good. She's just not thinking clearly. She needs help. They weren't trying to bring me home. They were trying to bring me under. I didn't respond. Not to them. But I called Kieran. He picked up after one ring. "Grandma?" he whispered, like he wasn't sure if he was dreaming. "I'm here," I said. Long pause. Then, "You're okay?" "Better than okay." "Where are you?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I chose." He didn't push. He just said, "I'm glad. I miss you." I told him I missed him too. That was all. No details, no stories. Just presence. Just truth. The next day, a man came to the cafe during my shift, neatly dressed, holding a briefcase. He didn't order anything, just stood by the pastry display until the rush died down. Then he stepped forward. "Mrs. Harlow?" I nodded. "My name is Derek Sorensen. I represent Adam and Lisa Harlow. They've asked me to speak with you regarding your well-being and your assets. I stared at him. He had the kind of face that had never been told no. My well-being is excellent, I said. My assets are my concern. He cleared his throat. They'd like to ensure you're safe. I am. And that you're not under any... I'm not, I cut in. But if I were, it would be because of them. He shifted. They miss you. I raised an eyebrow. Do they? Or do they miss control? He didn't answer. I handed him a folded letter I had prepared. A legal statement declaring I was of sound mind, in safe housing, with access to independent counsel. Give them this, I said, and tell them the next document they send better come with an apology or a retraction. He left without finishing his sentence. That evening, I told Marlene everything, not in one flood, piece by piece, like setting out dishes for tea. She listened, said little, poured more wine. When I finished, she nodded. They made a mistake, she said. They assumed you'd never stop being convenient. I slept well that night. 3 days later, Kieran called again. I think Mum's in town, he said. She's been weird all day. If something happened, please be careful. I thanked him and promised I'd be alert. Sure enough, the next afternoon, Lisa appeared at the cafe, wearing a coat too nice for the weather, standing by the pastry case pretending to read the chalkboard. I didn't go to her. I finished wiping down tables, filled the sugar jars, restocked the napkins. She waited. Eventually, she stepped forward. Martha, she said. Her voice was quiet, unfamiliar. Can we talk? I nodded toward the back. We sat in a booth. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. Real. I didn't know Adam sent a lawyer, she began. That wasn't me? I said nothing. She fiddled with her ring. We panicked. You were just... gone. The kids were upset. We didn't know what to tell them. You could have said the truth, I replied. That you moved me into a shed and forgot I was still alive. She winced. We didn't forget. No, I said. You erased. There was silence. She pulled an envelope from her purse and pushed it toward me. Kieran, she said. He wanted me to give you this. He doesn't know I'm here. I opened it later. A photo, me and Kieran in the backyard, years ago. He was 5, sitting in my lap, both of us laughing. On the back, a note in his handwriting. I remember. Just that. 2 words. I placed the photo beside my bed. The next day, I mailed my final letter to Lisa. It read, I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now. I finally started mine. No signature, no return address. Just truth, sealed and sent. And that, perhaps, was the first moment I felt free not just in action, but in spirit. Not just safe from them, but safe from the echo of them. I had drawn the line, and unlike before, this one would hold. The decision came not out of rage, but out of stillness. The kind of clarity that follows after a long winter, when the last snow melts and you suddenly realize the shape of the earth underneath has changed. It was a Sunday morning. I had just returned from the cafe, where I'd completed the early shift. The streets were empty, pale with early sun. I walked slowly, not out of pain, but with the deliberate pace of someone who knows they no longer owe anyone urgency. I had a paper bag in my hand, half a loaf of sourdough and a single ripe tomato, which the baker's wife had set aside for me with a wink. She said it reminded her of August in a better decade, and I believed her. When I reached the house, Marlene was in the garden, her hands deep in soil, whispering to a stubborn row of basil. "You get your hands dirty today?" she asked without turning. "Not yet," I replied, "but I might." She nodded, still focused. Good. The clean ones are always the liars. I stepped inside and went directly to my room, where the morning light slanted across the desk. I took out the manila envelope I had kept untouched for weeks. Inside were the property records, the notarized statements, the receipts, the emails I had printed and annotated, quiet documentation of a story they hoped would remain unspoken. It wasn't revenge I was seeking. It was reality. I had lived too long in the spaces others constructed for me. Caretaker, helper, quiet background. But I was none of those things, not anymore. I was the owner of my own breath. I called the office of Gordon and Jameson just before noon. The receptionist answered and asked if I was calling to check on an existing claim. "No," I said. "I'm calling to begin one." She transferred me. When the attorney came on the line, I introduced myself plainly. "Martha Lillian Harlow. I need to formally assert my rights of co-ownership and petition for documentation of any legal action initiated in my name without consent." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "We can absolutely help with that." The sound of those words made my spine straighten. "We can help with that. Not we'll consider. Not maybe. Not if your son approves. But help." As if I had always been entitled to it. Because I had. I met with the legal representative the next day. A young woman named Alina, barely 30, but sharp-eyed and unafraid. She asked questions clearly, never once slowing down her vocabulary to match my grey hair. I liked her immediately. "You're not here to punish them," she said, as we reviewed the documentation. "You're here to establish that you were never powerless. That matters." She spoke with that rare kind of legal gentleness, the kind that knows compassion isn't weakness, but precision. "We can issue a notice of intent," she continued, "formally stating your property stake, your right to residence, and your non-consent to any future legal assumptions of incapacity." She looked at me closely. "And if you wish to sever that co-ownership, we can demand a buyout, market value, full records, your name removed on your terms, not theirs." I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "On my terms." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from anxiety, but from something else. An unfamiliar energy, as if my cells had remembered how to speak. The notice was delivered the following Thursday. Adam and Lisa signed for it. I imagine the moment. Their perfect kitchen, the mailman handing over the envelope, Lisa slicing a pear for her mid-morning snack, Adam reading the header. Notice of intent regarding property rights and legal autonomy. I imagine the colour draining from his face. I imagine the weight of what he had erased returning, syllable by syllable, with the force of legal print. They didn't call. Not immediately. Not that day, or the next. But the following Monday, an email arrived. From Adam. No greeting. Just, "Why are you doing this?" No punctuation. Just blame, stripped bare. I didn't reply. I sent the email to Alina, who responded formally. All further communication will go through counsel. 2 days later, a counteroffer arrived. Modest. Almost insulting. A gesture of goodwill, they called it. I laughed aloud when I read that phrase. Goodwill. As if they had offered me a coat during a storm I'd never been meant to survive. We declined. Alina drafted a new letter. Demand for full equity payout, legal valuation, closure with dignity. I read every line, corrected 2 punctuation marks, and signed at the bottom. Not with anger, with accuracy. The final call came from Lisa. I was home, folding laundry, the window open, the scent of basil drifting in from the garden. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Martha," she said. Her voice was strained, but measured. "We'd like to resolve this privately." I let the silence stretch long enough to feel real. "I am resolving it," I said. "Legally? Peacefully?" "Entirely." She sighed. "You don't have to do this." "You already did," I replied. "You just thought I wouldn't notice." "It was a misunderstanding." "No," I said. "It was convenient." Another pause. Then she asked, voice faltering, "Do you hate us?" I leaned against the windowsill, watching a bird hop across the fence line. "No," I said. "I've stopped needing you to be anything other than what you are. That's not hate. That's release." We finalized the paperwork 3 weeks later. They transferred my portion of the home's equity, market value, minus no dignity. I used the funds to secure a small apartment near the library, walking distance from the cafe. 2nd floor, west-facing window, hardwood floors, a stove that clicks when it lights. Nothing fancy, but every inch of it is mine. I hung a single frame above the desk, Kieran's photo, the one with the birdhouse, the laugh, the past that had once been honest. I never told Adam where I moved. He never asked. But Kieran visits sometimes, brings me books, asks questions, remembers. The night I signed the last document, Alina and I sat quietly in her office, a small lamp casting warm light across the table. She handed me a copy of everything, neatly bound. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "is what reclaiming looks like." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. She smiled. "No need. You did it." I walked home through the quiet streets, the folder pressed to my chest. I stopped once, outside the bakery. It was closed, but the lights were on. And inside I could see the baker's wife wiping down the counter. I raised a hand. She smiled and waved back. I reached my building, climbed the stairs slowly, unlocked my door. I set the folder on the table, took off my shoes, and stood in the middle of my apartment. No one had curated this space. No one had assigned me a corner. I poured myself a glass of water, held it up to the light, and in that small, plain act, clear water, steady hand, I felt it settle. Not victory. Something quieter. Something rooted. I wasn't in exile anymore. I was home. I don't keep much anymore. Just what I use. A kettle. A blue mug. A notebook with a cloth cover. The apartment is small, but it breathes. I open the windows most mornings, even in the winter, just for a moment, to remind the walls and my lungs that the world is still out there, still turning. The kitchen smells faintly of cinnamon from the tea I've started drinking. I never liked it before. Now it tastes like quiet mornings and no footsteps behind me. The floors creak in familiar ways, and the hallway holds my shadow gently. I've stopped looking at clocks so much. The days pass like they should, without rush or duty. I read again, slowly, a few pages a day, sometimes aloud, to no one, just to hear my own voice returning to me. Once a week, I take the bus to the park, the long one by the water with the crooked benches. I walk slowly past the swings, the vendor carts, the old sycamores whose bark peels like pages. I sit near the ducks. I feed them dry oats from a paper bag I keep in my coat pocket. Children sometimes come up to ask if they can toss a few. I nod. They don't know me, and I don't expect them to. But I see their mothers glance over, checking. I smile. A real smile, not the one I wore like armor, but the kind that comes when you've made peace with being both visible and alone. They usually smile back. I don't talk about Adam or Lisa anymore. Not out of pain, but because I've said what needed to be said. Out loud, on paper, in court, in my body. The echoes no longer control the room. They tried to shrink me, then silence me, then replace me. But here I am. Not in defiance, just in fact. They'll tell their version, I'm sure, that I left too soon, that I misunderstood, that I changed. Let them. There are always two stories. The one they tell about you, and the one you carry in your bones. I know mine. I see Kieran sometimes. He comes by with mismatched socks and too many opinions about music. He brings pastries and small questions. How do you make gravy without lumps? Did Grandpa ever get scared? Do I think it's okay to leave a job if your boss doesn't know your name? I answer with honesty and no performance. He listens. He stays. He leaves quietly. That's all I ask. That, and to be met as I am, not as a lesson or an obligation, but as a person. He understands that now. Maybe he always did. Sometimes I write letters I never send. Not angry ones. Gentle, precise ones. To women like me. To strangers I pass on buses, with tired eyes and hands that have folded too many towels. I tell them what I wish someone had told me sooner. That kindness without respect is a form of erasure. That silence can be cruelty in a softer voice. And that survival is not enough if you no longer recognize the woman who made it through. I remind them that they're not too old to change the story. That being useful is not the same as being loved. And that there is life, real life, after exile. It's smaller, perhaps. Quieter. But it's yours. Last week I planted a lavender bush in a tin pail on my balcony. The soil was dry, the wind sharp. But it took root anyway. Every morning I step out and check it. The leaves tremble, delicate but certain. It hasn't bloomed yet. But I believe it will. Some things just take longer. I know that now. And if some woman, somewhere, finds herself in a shed, or a guest room, or a corner of her own home that feels like exile, I hope she hears this. Not as inspiration, not even as warning, just as recognition. You're not invisible. You're not mistaken. And if one day you walk away with nothing but your name, that will be enough. Carry it like fire. It's yours.